Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined by Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. Senator, thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely, Nancy.
I want to start out by asking you about the situation in Venezuela, because there are now serious signs that military action, including potentially ground action, could be imminent. You have tried twice to pass war powers resolutions that would force President Trump to get approval from Congress first before any military action. Twice you have failed. Do you think the numbers on this will change if there is ground action, and will it even matter at that point?
I do believe the numbers will change. You're right. I along with others, filed a resolution, no war in Venezuela or against Venezuela without congressional approval. It failed, but that was before all of these assets have amassed around Venezuela and before President Trump said that the airspace needs to be closed. I will move with colleagues, Senator Schumer, Senator Paul, Senator Schiff, immediately should there be military action. And then secondly, I also attempted to stop what I view as illegal boat strikes in the Caribbean and the Pacific together with Adam Schiff. And the circumstances have changed in the months since we had that vote. In each of these instances, we were able to get 2 Republicans to vote together with Democrats. We think the escalating pace and some of the recent revelations, so for example, the recent revelation about the kill everyone order apparently dictated by Secretary Hassett, we do believe that we will get more support for these motions when they are refiled.
You're referring to this new Washington Post report that says that Secretary Hassett called for everyone aboard the first suspected drug boat that was targeted to be killed. When 2 people survived, the military went back in, reportedly with a follow-on strike. What questions do you have for the Pentagon about that situation?
Well, first, if that reporting is true, it's a clear violation of the DOD's own laws of war, as well as international laws about the way you treat people who are in that circumstance. And so this rises to the level of a war crime if it's true. And the questions that we've been asking for months are, give us the evidence that the folks on board were really narco traffickers. In one instance, there were 2 survivors, one Colombian, one Ecuadorian, in a different strike. Instead of arresting them and prosecuting them, the U.S. picked them up and returned them to their countries of origin where they were released. So if they were narco traffickers, why would we do that? We need more evidence about that. And we definitely need the administration to finally answer the question of why strike rather than interdict. If you know where the ships are, you can interdict. And when you do, you get evidence. You get individuals. You can squeeze them to give testimony against their higher ups. You get evidence with the drug seizures. And finally, the other question that my colleagues and I are deeply worried about is the entire legal rationale for these strikes. We had to pry with a crowbar after weeks and weeks out of the administration the supposed legal rationale for the strikes in international waters. It was very shoddy because it's classified. I can't tell you what's in it, but I can tell you it was not at all persuasive that these are legal actions. And so together with a whole series of things, the early retirement of the head of Southcom, the news that the Southcom's lead attorney said these strikes were not lawful, the decision of allies like the UK to stop sharing intelligence with the United States in this area because they believe the strikes are illegal. It's time for Congress to rein in a president who is deciding to wage war on his own say-so, which is not what the Constitution allows.
Yeah, a lot of lawmakers on both sides have questions that are similar to the ones you're raising. On a related note, President Trump just announced this weekend that he plans to pardon former Honduras President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was accused of conspiring with drug cartels to move 400 tons of cocaine from Honduras to the U.S. He's currently serving a 45-year sentence. Were you surprised by the president's plan to pardon him, given how strongly the president feels about drugs coming from other countries like Venezuela?
This is shocking. And again, this is not an individual who was accused of running drugs to the United States. He was convicted in a federal court in the United States. One of the bits of evidence was his statement that was picked up by those near to him that he wanted to shove drugs up the nose of gringos and flood the United States with cocaine, more than 400 tons. He was the leader of one of the largest criminal enterprises that has ever been subject to a conviction in U.S. courts. And less than 1 year into a sentence, President Trump is pardoning him, suggesting that President Trump cares nothing about narco-trafficking, suggesting possibly that pardons are now for sale by this White House. And if he doesn't care about narco-trafficking, and this was also shown earlier this year with the pardoning of Ross Ulbricht, then what is this Venezuela thing really about? The president of Colombia has said that he thinks it's about the U.S. trying to seize oil assets in Venezuela. I lived in Honduras for a year as a missionary way back when. The conspiracy theories are running wild in the Americas about why this military effort is so important to the president when he's pardoning drug kingpins who are running drugs into the United States. These are also questions that we're going to have to dig deeply into when we return to Washington tomorrow.
I want to ask you about some big developments in Washington this week. The Trump administration is making big changes in the wake of this tragic shooting of 2 National Guard members. They are halting all asylum decisions. They are halting Afghan immigration applications. The president says he wants a permanent pause to immigration from what he calls third world countries. We don't know how many countries. Do they have a case that it makes sense to put some of these processes on hold while they figure out what happened here?
Well, you know, first, let's just acknowledge this sad fact. These 2 Guards members, Ms. Beckstrom and Mr. Wolf, what a tragedy for them and their families. And you know what? They should have been at home at Thanksgiving, celebrating Thanksgiving with their families, not deployed in a political deployment to do law enforcement in D.C. that the D.C. police and other local law enforcement agencies can do. And this demonstrates yet again something we've seen so often. Our troops, including our Guards members, they're going to serve in brave and courageous and self-sacrificing ways. And we can be so proud of them. But the orders that they get from their civilian leaders, that's where the problem comes in. Whether it's a Hegseth order to kill them all or an order to send Guardsmen and women in a political stunt deployment to cities around the country, these 2 individuals should have been celebrating Thanksgiving with their families. And I just mourn for them and all who suffer as a result. The president's decision to say, okay, this particular criminal who should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, who came in under an asylum grant that President Trump and his administration decided this past summer, that now we're going to pause processes or asylum from 19, quote, third world countries. You don't know which ones they are. You shouldn't paint with a broad brush. Go after a criminal to the full extent of the law, but don't say that all Afghans in the United States, those who served with our military and who lost their lives and their health and their families in many ways by doing so, don't say that they're all bad. Don't say that people who come from third world countries are bad. Virginia, about 1 out of 9 of us is an immigrant, and our immigrant communities in Virginia have been an enormous source of strength to our Commonwealth and to our country, and it's wrong to target them all for the bad actions of an individual, just like we wouldn't target other communities in the United States for the bad actions of one individual.
Something tells me this is going to be a big topic of conversation in Congress.
It will.
This week. Senator Kaine, I really appreciate you being with us, and happy Thanksgiving.
So glad we could do it. Thanks.
And we'll be right back. We turn now to the director of the White House National Economic Council, Kevin Hassett. Kevin, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be here.
So we've all eaten the turkey. Holiday
Yes.
shopping has begun in earnest. So let's talk about what the holiday shopping season looks like. We've got new surveys from Goldman Sachs and Bank of America that paint a modest picture of the holiday spending outlook. They say low and middle income Americans are planning to pull back a little bit because they perceive that prices are higher. And they say if spending is up this year, it's going to be because goods in part are more expensive. Is this the temporary result or long-term result of the Trump tariffs?
Right. Well, what we've seen, those were reports about what people anticipated would happen over the Thanksgiving weekend, but we now have hard data for Black Friday and even for Saturday, and the online sales were up almost 10%, in-store sales were up 4%. It was really a blockbuster weekend after Thanksgiving. And so I think that the folks who were saying, wow, maybe people are going to be anxious about, going back and getting presents for the kids and so on, they've been disproven this week. And then I think the reason is that incomes are up this year. We had a great jobs report, and with strong income and the government shut down over so that people presumably have a little pent-up demand as well, I think that we're looking at a great recovery from a few weeks because of the shutdown.
Sure. I'm wondering how much of that spending increase you think is attributable to the fact that prices are up. Let me give you an example. The maker of Tonka trucks said a couple days ago that a toy truck that cost $30 last year is going to cost $40 this year, partly because they lost about 8 weeks of shipping due to the U.S. trade war with China. What's your advice to holiday shoppers who don't want to spend more this year than they did last year or can't afford to spend more?
Right. Well, as you know, it depends on what you're looking at. Like egg prices are down, gasoline prices drop below $2 a gallon in a lot of places.
You mean
mortgage
below?
Rates are down.
Gas prices on average are still at $3 a gallon.
Yeah, that's right.
Country,
For
right?
a few states, they got below $2. And so the point is just that in the end, what matters is in the aggregate, the average across everything that everybody buys, and that averaged about 5% under Joe Biden and is a little bit above 2.5%, about cut in half for President Trump. And the bottom line, though, is really that wages have been growing faster than prices, and that's why real incomes this year are up by about $1,200 so far. That's why we can have a great Black Friday and a great Thanksgiving sales weekend, because people feel like they have more money in their pockets. Even though you're right, there are some things that cost more and some things that cost less. But on average, we're about half the inflation rate of Joe Biden.
Polls show that the public, despite some of the data you're presenting, is getting more skeptical. In our latest CBS News poll, 68% of Americans said they believe that President Trump's policies are pushing grocery prices up. They're up about 1.4% year to date. And economic sentiment, the number of people who think the economy is good, has actually dropped 6 points since he took office. How do you explain that?
Well, first of all, you mentioned quite accurately the 1.4% increase in grocery prices. I think the interesting thing about that is that that's way below the Fed's target of 2% for everything else, right? And so you'd have to concede that 1.4% is very, very low inflation. And so I think that the bottom line is that we've got the big, beautiful bill cutting taxes on overtime, taxes for tips and so on. And all that money is going to start to be in people's pockets. And that's why they're optimistic about next year. Scott Bessent said last week that he's looking at first half of next year that could be in the 4% range. And the reason is that we passed the tax cuts in July, and so they didn't have time to change all the tax forms and everything. And so people are going to get really, really big refunds in the fall as well. And so we're really optimistic, and we think that the good news around Thanksgiving is a sign of something that's even stronger to come.
You mentioned purchasing power. One thing that is going to affect purchasing power for 22 million Americans is the expiration of Obamacare premium subsidies. Last week, a funny situation, the White House floated this plan to extend the subsidies for 2 years. Then you dropped the proposal. And then the president said on Air Force One, somebody said I wanted to extend it for 2 years. I don't want to extend it for 2 years. I'd rather not extend them at all. Was this a case of the right hand not talking to the left hand?
No, I think that people were talking to each other, but what happened, as you know, as a professional journalist, is that sometimes people leak pre-decisional things that are confidential and pre-decisional, and I think that somebody did that, and then it rolled back because it hadn't been through the whole process. But President Trump has been clear that he's very concerned about the cost of health care, and that's why we had $50 billion for rural hospitals in the big, beautiful bill, why we tried to get $30 billion in for cost sharing, and the Democrats didn't like that. They had an alternative approach. And so I think that what we're going to see now between now and Christmas is that people are going to work work this out, because we have a solution, the White House has a solution for cost sharing, and the Democrats have an alternative, and people don't want for the few seniors that have really massive increases to see those. But don't forget that the vast majority of people in the Affordable Care Act are getting their insurance for less than $50 a month. And so while this is an issue that needs to be worked out, we don't want to cause panic for the folks who are worried that they're going to lose the thing that they have. It's really just the very high cost people who are closer to retirement age that have the problem.
Bloomberg is reporting, as I'm sure you know, that you are now considered the front runner to replace Fed Reserve Chair Jay Powell when his term expires in the spring. Secretary Bessent, who is heading up this search, said he was holding final interviews this week. How did yours go?
I am not sure that Bloomberg has the story right. I'm really honored to be amongst a group of really great candidates. The thing that I was most impressed about this week when that story leaked was that really, I think the news for markets was that President Trump is close to announcing a new person who's going to replace Jay Powell. And if you look at the market response to that, it was very positive. We had a great Treasury auction, interest rates went down. And so I think that the American people could expect President Trump to pick somebody who's going to help them, have cheaper car loans and easier access to mortgages at lower rates. And that's what we saw in the market response to the rumor about me, which, is probably about as valuable as the rumor about the health care policy that we just talked about.
Well, I guess we'll find out if they're right sooner rather than later when we hear the president's decision. So for now, Director of the White House National Economic Council, that's your title today. Kevin Hassett, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in a moment. We turn now to the fight against hunger in the United States. According to government data, 47.4 million people lived in what the Department of Agriculture calls a food insecure household in 2023. That's when a household can't necessarily obtain enough food to feed all of its members. One of the largest groups working to combat food insecurity is Feeding America. And we're joined now by CEO Claire Babineaux-Fontenot, who is in Charleston, South Carolina this morning. Claire, thanks so much for being with us and happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. So during the shutdown, we saw these incredibly long lines at food banks. The shutdown has now been over for a couple of weeks. SNAP benefits are going out again. But even before the shutdown, food insecurity was at its highest rate in nearly a decade. So what is the situation now that you're seeing at food banks around the country as we head into the holidays?
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you made that point. I think your viewers may be surprised to learn that food insecurity rates before the shutdown were higher than at any point during the pandemic. As an example, we're continuing to see very high demand. I think part of the reason is because the fastest growing group of people turning to the charitable food system are people who don't even qualify for any federal nutrition programs. So this is an area that we've got to stay focused on. We know the kinds of things that work. We need to do those things so that we can really address what's happening with hunger and poverty in the country.
What do you think is contributing to the rise in hunger and this group of people who, as you say, don't qualify for benefits but are showing an increased need for food?
Yeah, I think it's that the system is broken. Right now, there's so many people, if you can imagine, in this country who can't afford to get a raise at work because we have a system that does not incentivize people to continue to move up the ladder. We've got ladders with big missing rungs, if you will. So we can do something about that. We could have a sliding scale, for instance, that allows people to move out of poverty. By doing that, because food insecurity is actually a symptom of poverty, they'll move out of that as well. We as a nation should all want people to be able to provide for themselves. We should all want them to be able to get work that they can feel proud of and support their families with. We have the power to do all of those things. It will require that we work together, that we be honest about what's broken, and that we really get committed about fixing those things.
What are the main challenges that the organizations in your network are facing this holiday season as they try to feed people who are hungry? Is the food there for the people who need it?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the lines are longer than the food that is available. And one of the hardest things to witness will be seeing these people who have the same dreams, aspirations for their kids and themselves as I have for mine and all of your viewers have for theirs. Feeling the need to turn to the charitable food system. It takes a lot of courage and resiliency and commitment to family oftentimes to be able to do that. And then for them to turn up in spite of all of those barriers and not be able to provide them with what they really need. So I have a deep respect for people experiencing hunger in this country. I've been a person who's experienced hunger before. I know many people who have, many people who still do. So many of them are my heroes. And then another set of heroes that I have are people working in this fight in the Feeding America Network who show up shoulder to shoulder with people experiencing hunger, who are so deeply committed to their well-being. So we need to position people experiencing hunger to be able to fend for themselves, and we need to position food banks to be able to provide them with the support that they need in this moment until they get there.
As you know, there are about 2 million Americans who are going to be affected by changes to the SNAP program that were made earlier this year in a vote by Congress. They will not be receiving SNAP benefits any longer. What are the economic implications of that? And in about 30 seconds, what can your organizations do about it?
According to the Congressional Budget Office, we're probably looking at about a 6 billion meal per year gap that's going to be created. So the kinds of things that we ought to do, we ought to address fraud where it exists. We ought to incentivize people to be able to get the hand up that they need and to move out of poverty. We ought to address error rates, but we ought to do all of these things strategically, and we ought to do them in a bipartisan way. This ought to be the kind of thing that this country can come together around, that we can hold hands, shoulder to shoulder, because
Claire
when people
Babineaux-Fontenot,
experiencing hunger win, we all
have
do.
to leave it there. We've got a hard out, but thank you so much, Claire Babineaux-Fontenot from Feeding America. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. And that's it for us today. Thanks for watching. For Face the Nation, I'm Nancy Cordes. Have a good one.